Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday, everybody. There may be another front opening up in Beijing's war against slowing economic performance, deteriorating consumer confidence. Considering policymakers are desperately trying to boost household spending, this isn't good. The month of October and the early weeks of this month saw many bad signs on this front, though you wouldn't think so if you just read state-run media. The state-run Global Times, for example, published an article called "China's Double 11 Shopping Spree Sees Record Figures as Consumption Recovers." Writing, JD.com, a Chinese e-commerce giant, reported new records in various indicators. Quote, JD.com's Double 11, November 11th, also known as Singles Day, a Chinese shopping festival, transaction volume, order volume, and number of users all hit new highs, end quote. And, quote, meanwhile, Alibaba Group, another Chinese e-commerce giant often credited with first launching the Double 11 shopping festival 15 years ago, said on Sunday that its platforms, Taobao and Tmall, saw positive growth during the festival, end quote. State-run Xinhua, citing official data, reported that China set a record of handling 639 million parcels on the Double 11 holiday, a year-on-year increase of 15.76%. However, we need to look at this a little bit more closely. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai reports this week that while China's two biggest e-commerce companies, JD.com and Alibaba, did indeed report higher sales from this year's Double 11 festival, quote, but they still kept tight-lipped about just how high, as they rolled out discount-heavy strategies to encourage reluctant consumers to spend, end quote. Indeed, a few days before Singles Day, Bain & Co. published an annual survey arguing that Chinese consumers have been largely reluctant to spend on goods and instead have been saving at a high rate. For this year's event, more than 3/4, or 77% of shoppers, were planning to spend less or maintain 2022 spending levels, said the report. What's more, some of the spending appears to be fueled by a surge in cheap short-term loans. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports this week that, quote, Chinese banks are falling over themselves to hand out consumption loans amid the government's drive to boost spending and support economic growth, end quote. As we can see, short-term personal consumption loans have grown rapidly this year, even as overall credit demand from households has been less impressive. As an economy, as a system, we are reminded, as always, that there are often never solutions, only trade-offs. A former bank branch president told Caixin that because of the need to meet regulatory targets for the issuance of these short-term loans, profit margins are not considered. Quote, if regulatory authorities also set rigid targets for consumer loans, bank presidents will have to choose between earning less and not being able to accomplish the task, end quote. And because these banks are state-owned, they often have no choice. And of course, cheap debt can only stimulate in the short term, it can't sustain. Quote, there are basically two ways to raise the consumption share of GDP. One way is to get households either to increase their consumer debt or reduce their savings rates. This will boost consumption but ultimately isn't sustainable. The other way is to raise the household income share of GDP, either directly or by strengthening the social safety net and other indirect transfers. This, of course, is much more sustainable, but given how difficult it is, much of the focus for now seems to be on the former, end quote. Meanwhile, this week saw the publication of the Yicai Chief Economist's Confidence Index. The index fell to 50.8 in November from 50.9 last month, indicating slowing growth in consumer confidence. Independent surveys and alternative data sets also indicate that China's consumption rebound lost momentum in October. Data from Paris-based QuantCube Technology and US company Morning Consult both show that Chinese consumer demand for recreation and transport both fell in October month on month. Morning Consult's Consumer Sentiment Index, which asks consumers about their personal finances, expectations for business conditions, and attitudes on major household purchases, fell below 150 for the first time since February, with the accompanying report expressing, quote, confidence in China is falling fast, end quote. Next up, Taiwan. If you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is a big help too. And for anyone who wants to help keep the channel financially sustainable, open and free for all 6 days a week, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Taiwan's presidential race is heating up. The main opposition party, the KMT, and the smaller TPP, Taiwan People's Party, have until Friday to reach a deal to merge their campaigns in order to have any chance of defeating DPP candidate William Lai in January. The process of officially registering candidates will start next week, and all nominations must be submitted by the end of the week. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes that on Tuesday, yesterday, the two mainland-friendly parties issued a joint press notice saying they would meet the following day, today, to discuss the presidential ticket. It said that former President Ma Ying-jeou has been invited to, quote, serve as a witness, end quote, at the talks, suggesting that the former leader may be a kingmaker in the ongoing negotiations. Meanwhile, also yesterday, Tuesday, Wellington Koo, Secretary-General of the President's National Security Council, gave his first briefing with foreign journalists. Taipei's top national security official expressed that the US is moving fast to strengthen Taiwan's defenses against a potential mainland attack, including by training its troops, expressing, quote, they are not just discussing it with us, but taking action. Our relationship on these security issues is so close, but we must keep a low profile. I can only say they are using all possible ways to help us, no matter if it's in training or the build-up of asymmetric fighting capabilities, end quote. Coming just a day before Xi Jinping is set to meet with President Biden in San Francisco, the words will not go down well in Beijing. Obviously aware of this meeting, Koo told the foreign journalists, quote, the Chinese side will of course not make any concessions on Taiwan, but the US cannot make any concessions on Taiwan either, because it's in the core interest of the United States, end quote. UK-based The Financial Times writes that Taipei has not previously acknowledged publicly Washington's expansion of its assistance, including the training of entire battalions from Taiwan's ground forces in the United States. Koo also expressed concern for the uncertainty surrounding the upcoming presidential elections in Taiwan and how Beijing will react if the DPP's William Lai is elected, who Beijing has already labeled a separatist. Koo said, quote, I don't think that China is already prepared to take military action against us after the election results come out January 13th. We have not seen that they are making preparations or have the capability for that yet. However, more grey zone operations is unavoidable, including an increase in the scale of military intimidation or economic coercion, end quote. Next up, yesterday we examined that, according to a new survey from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, a record level of Americans, 58%, view China's development as a world power as a critical threat to the vital interests of the United States, the highest level recorded in the surveys dating back to 1990. To end today, we will unpack these survey findings a little more, as popular US sentiments have a direct impact on US politics and therefore policy towards China, especially in the lead-up to another presidential election. We are now quoting excerpts of the survey report directly. In addition to viewing Beijing's rise as a threat to the United States, Americans no longer trust China to handle global problems. Today, only 19% of Americans say they have a great deal, 3%, or a fair amount, 16%, of confidence in China to deal responsibly with world problems. a negative assessment that is shared across party lines. This represents a sharp decline from 2018, when 4 in 10 Americans, 41%, had at least some confidence in China to responsibly handle global problems. At a time when public concern about China is back at an all-time high, a plurality of Americans, 46%, also say that US leaders are not paying attention to the issue of US competition with China. Another third, 35%, say leaders are paying about the right amount of attention to the issue, while 17% say they are paying too much attention. When asked to choose the area of most concern about China, Americans divide almost evenly across different issue areas. Similar proportions of Americans point to China's economic power, 23%, its communist political system, 22%, its human rights policies, 21%, and its military power, 20%. In addition, 12% say that none of the above are their main concern. Concern about China's economic power is similar across party lines, but greater partisan divisions emerge on other issues. Republicans tend to be more worried about China's political system, 28%, and military power, 26%, while Democrats are more troubled by China's human rights policies, 28%. Independents are somewhat more likely to say that none of these areas are a main concern about China, 16%. Across a range of issue areas, Americans are generally more likely to say that the United States government's response to China has not gone far enough than to say it has been about right, with few saying it has gone too far. Majorities of Americans say that the government has not done enough on the theft of U.S. intellectual property by Chinese companies, 65%, Chinese surveillance against the U.S., 62%, China's policies on human rights, 58%, and economic competition with China, 52%. A plurality of the American public also views the U.S. government's response on China's role in global supply chains and China's political influence in international institutions as not going far enough, 49% and 48% respectively. However, the margin is narrower between those who think the government has not gone far enough or has been about right on China's territorial claims in Asia and China's military power. The American public is evenly divided over which country is stronger economically, with a third pointing to the United States, another third pointing to China, and a final third saying the two are about equal in economic power. However, this is a modest improvement from where Americans viewed U.S. economic power in 2014. Since then, Americans have become less likely to view China as the stronger economic power and more likely to see the United States and China as roughly equal. Americans feel the United States is on somewhat stronger footing when it comes to military power. A plurality of Americans say that the United States, 46%, is militarily stronger than China, 15%, though more than a third say the two are about equal, 37%. Yet, over the past decade, and particularly since 2019, Americans have become slightly less confident in U.S. military superiority and more likely to view the two nations as equally matched. Here ends the direct quote in today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.